Good afternoon, and thank you so much for taking time to join us at Global Genes Live, a rare patient advocacy Unsummit. We are excited for our upcoming session, From Data to Decisions, Leveraging Genetic Data Beyond a Diagnosis. My name is Sharlene Brown. I'm the founder and CEO of Dr. Bird Consulting, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Before we get everything kicked off, I wanted to review a few housekeeping notes for just a sec. First, all attendees are currently muted by the moderator to reduce any interruptions. We encourage you to use the chat function in the On24 window for any questions you may have throughout the session, and the moderator team will present them to the speakers. To open the chat, please click on the blue chat button located on the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. If there are any questions that are not able to be addressed by the speakers or we run out of time, we will do our best to follow up with you after the program. Also, make sure to post your top takeaways and fun moments during Global Genes Live on social media and tag @GlobalGenes for a chance to be featured on our social media channels. Also, be sure to use hashtag 2020GG Summit. Finally, we encourage you all to participate as active listeners and take advantage of an opportunity to hear from leaders and experts here and ask questions of them. This program is your time to learn and find answers on critical challenges to rare disease research. I am now pleased to welcome our discussion leaders, Dr. Mariella Simon, staff scientist at the Children's Hospital of Orange County, Darrell Robinson, founder and CEO of BioMedverse LLC, and Amy Brin, executive director and CEO of the Child Neurology Foundation. They will each share a more complete background as we delve into the conversation. But for now, I'd like to invite Dr. Simon to kick things off.
Thank you for the introduction. Welcome to our laboratory. I'm here in the city of Orange in California at the Children's Hospital of Orange County, and this is a live view of our laboratory where we're generating the genetic data that we're discussing today in this panel. So sorry for a little bit of background noise, but I don't have an office, and I thought this might be exciting for everybody to see how we work. So I only have 2 slides, and I wanted to go over quickly what we do here at CHOC. We have an approach that we name From the Bedside to the Bench and Back to the Bedside. And so first, when we encounter a patient at CHOC in the Department of Metabolics and mitochondrial disease and neurological disease. We have actually combined clinics here. Usually patients arrive with, and their families with, already a lot of information. A lot of testing has been done before, and we assemble and review their charts. The patient's always in the center of the discussion. And so when we review what has been done for the patients, we then complement with tests that still need to get done to come to a diagnosis. And in these days and ages, this is usually involves whole exome sequencing, whole genome sequencing, or other big genetic panels. When those panels come back inconclusive, then usually the case comes to me, and we have a case discussion, and then we enroll the patient and the families into our research study. So we have an IRB-approved research study to go beyond what the clinical laboratory testing will be able to accomplish. And what we do there is we basically have all of the data sent to us here at CHOC that was assembled in the clinical laboratories, which is nice because it's at no cost to us or the patient. The data is already there, and through our research study, we can just transfer it to me, and then I can reanalyze it. Clinical laboratories have very stringent calls how they analyze their data, and I can look a lot deeper and cater my data analysis to the specific case. So that's really my specialty here. Then depending on what I come up with, sometimes I can find actually something that has been reported before. So that's a pretty easy task. Then I just go back to the physicians, I give them my results, and they can take this now all back to the bedside and design treatment or inform the families. And I'm going to go over the team approach that we have going from there. But unfortunately, often enough, I come up with either a variant in a gene that has never been reported. So we have to prove that there is actually causality of that variant or that mutation. And even worse is when we come up with a new gene that we think that has caused the disease, because now we really have to first convince ourselves and the scientific community that this really caused the disease, and then start basically from ground zero. How are we going to attack this problem and make the patient better? So when this happens, we need something test material. And for that, we here at CHOC use skin fibroblasts. So patients and their families have a small biopsy that we then use as material from that biopsy. From that skin biopsy, we can generate material for many years to come, so the patient never needs to suffer from another test. We do everything in a tissue culture model, and the tests are designed depending on the gene defect that we identified. So from there, if we think that this could go further, and we would actually like to approach companies or any kind of treatment approaches, we need to go to animal models. And we're lucky here at CHOC, we actually have also a mouse facility, and we can then pursue testing in animal models. For that, we for sure need to design first a research study that is grant funded, because those are always very expensive approaches. And then from there, we hope to convince, again, the scientific community that this is worth of a clinical trial, and design together with pharma and the industry treatment approaches that we can test in our cell models and in the animal models. So that's the circle of approaches in the laboratory. But now, let's say we have actually a diagnosis for one of our patients, and we have seen them in the clinic, and they're coming back now to be informed. We're very, very lucky here at CHOC that we can approach the issue of informing from all angles. We have a number of genetic counselors, and in my previous life, I also was, and I'm still a registered California genetic counselor. So we, I think, are very well trained in communicating the diagnosis to our patients and family, and we regularly see our families on average every 3 months. So if the questions didn't come up or our information didn't entirely come across, we pursue genetic counseling again and again and again. So, and then, of course, now the family wants to know what can actually be done to help their child. So we have a team of dietitians. Since I'm in the division of metabolics, they play a huge role, and diet and specific treatment options that are, for example, by a diet where we leave out fats or amino acids, or can help the patients tremendously depending on what the disease is. We have a nurse manager. A lot of children need care in their homes, so the case manager helps with setting those things up. We have numerous interpreters here. We have a social worker that can help with problems that arise in the family due to the stress that some of our families have 2, 3 affected children. It's a lot of work for them. And then, of course, the physicians. And we meet on a weekly basis and discuss our cases, our families, and how we can help them through this journey with a child with a rare disease. And now I'm going to give the phone or the mic back to Sharlene.
Thank you so much, Mariella. And now I'll hand it over to Darrell Robinson.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Darrell Robinson. Thank you for coming. I'm the founder and CEO of Biometaverse. So I'm going to talk about some of the resources from a patient or a caregiver perspective. I am a WPW, or a Wolff-Parkinson's White syndrome patient. So I do have some connection on what some people are going through, just to a lesser extent. So here's some resources from the patient and caregiver perspective, kind of as a starting point, just to get your brain working in order to find out more about your disorder and what you could do about it. So one, using your favorite search engine is very, very important. It can be very informative. But if you don't have online access, going to your public library can also be a great resource as well, because they can also help you in your search about learning about rare disorders, programs, and alternative therapies. Another great resource is the Mayo Clinic as well. They are world-renowned for their care and medical practice. WebMD is also a great resource to learn about particular treatments, statistics, symptoms, and ailments. Of course, Global Genes Foundation, one of the best international organizations on the planet for rare genetic disorders. And then also a good support system would be online and in-person support forums, not just in terms of, I guess, dealing with the pain from the disease, but if your doctor prescribes you medicine to help alleviate the symptoms, maybe there are side effects that you might feel. So online and in-person support forums can help. On the forums can give you ideas as far as to alleviate what you are experiencing. And now these are resources from a sort of physician perspective, which is just a deeper info dive. But the good thing is that these resources are less technical language, or they're able to translate and come across more clearly. So in Europe, there is the Voice of Rare Diseases in Europe, where you could find a lot of great resources for the not just for the rare disease population in Europe, but also other international organizations. There's also NORD, the National Organization for Rare Disorders, which also does great work and provides programs. Furthermore, there's also Gene Reviews, which is a database of thousands and thousands of tests and patient samples and genetic profiles as well. And then to go a little bit off topic, since this is probably an international audience, there's also some other foundations throughout the world. So for example, in Africa, there's Africa Rare. There's also Rare Diseases South Africa, Botswana Organization for Rare Diseases. In Asia, a big foundation that is doing great work and can offer great resources is the Asia Pacific Alliance for Rare Disease Organizations, the Philippine Society for Orphan Disorders, and the Rare Disorder Society for Singapore. And then for South America as well, the Argentina Federation of Rare Diseases and the Colombian Federation of Rare Diseases. A lot of these foundations do great work and have a lot of great resources. And now, what's the next point? Controlling what you can control. Being a patient, from my experience, it's not easy to just get a diagnosis and say, okay, you have some type of disorder that there's a lot of information about, but there's no treatment, there's no way to alleviate the symptoms, and things of that nature. But you still have to do your best to try to live with the disease and do your best to try to make yourself feel good. So number one, adults, you know your body better than anyone. If you are feeling an ache or anything like that, to your doctor, be very expressive with your doctor. Look up, research things, give them questions, say, I heard from another patient that they did this and they were able to feel a lot better. Basically, be like a ping pong ball, hit the ball towards your doctor, and your doctor will give you some kind of feedback back. For caregivers of children with disorders, you know your child better than anyone else. This is your personal data, so take recordings, how you're feeling at certain times of the day, to provide to your doctor and to provide to organizations like Global Genes. The thing that you can control, what makes you feel good emotionally and mentally. The physical body is connected to the mind and I guess to the spirit and emotionally. So if there's a certain shirt or necklace or song that makes you feel good and puts you in a good mood, continue to do that, continue to go towards that. Same thing with food as well too. Some genetic disorders are tied to body parts. So nutritionally eating that food that can help that body part or that organ can also help and then avoid what makes you not feel. So if large crowds do not make you feel so good, then avoid large crowds. If you feel, then try to get up a little later or go a little bit earlier. When I was diagnosed with PW, I was diagnosed by having to go to the emergency room and not geneticist or anything. They found order through the EKG. And I wasn't able to talk to a geneticist, so I had information on my own terms. But organizations like Global Genes can help you with that. And now I'll pass it back to Sharlene with the presentation.
Thank you for that, Darrell. And last but not least, Amy Brin.
Thanks, Sharlene. Thanks, Darrell. Thanks, Mariella. Hello, everybody. I'm Amy. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Child Neurology Foundation, and I'm talking to you from actually our regional office in Lexington, Kentucky, where we hoped to be hosting some horse races right now, but because of COVID, we're all still in our homes. So I'm thrilled to be here with you today. And the goal of my talk is really to bring all of the beautiful information that Mariella and Darrell just sent to you and just try to bring it a little bit back more to a very personal place. When we talk about genetic information and finding a diagnosis, what we hear often is it can be very intimidating and overwhelming to a patient or a family. So I really want to frame these comments in the framework of goals of care. Before I arrived at the foundation, I was an advanced practice nurse, boarded in pediatrics and in hospice and palliative medicine. So most of the families that I worked with were those that were really touching the limits of medicine and still trying to find hope and still trying to do more than just survive, but really thrive in the daily life of living with a life-threatening condition. And so we use the term of goals of care to really help them organize their priorities and their communication with their medical team. Goals of care are really just about you reflecting on what your values, what your priorities are, how you define quality of life, and then holding to those and organizing your plan of care as you move through, in this case, finding a diagnosis. Now, it's especially important for the community of rare disease to understand what goals of care are. About 3 years ago, the Child Neurology Foundation partnered with Global Genes to try to really understand where's the intersection between child neurology and rare disease. And what we found is that of the 7,000 rare disorders, half of them, or 3,500, have a neurologic component. And of those, 75% originate in childhood. So with that understanding, I'm going to assume that many of you that are listening today and we want to hear from today are those that have children in your lives that you're caring for that are living with a rare condition. And so your process, your walk, if you will, to finding a diagnosis can take several years, and you're doing so as a family. So again, this goals of care provides you a really nice, safe, and comprehensive framework for you to embark on that journey. At the Child Neurology Foundation, we have heard for many years about this diagnostic odyssey that families go on, that it's a journey. It's not a linear one. It's a start and stop. There's goods and there's bads. There's grief and there's joy in the process of finding that diagnosis. And so starting this year, we wanted to understand a little bit more about what that walk looks like. And so we partnered with Global Genes as well as over 30 other national organizations. And we did a national survey earlier this spring. And this data is about to be presented actually in a couple months at the Child Neurology Society meeting. So you're getting it first here. So first, we had over 1,000 caregivers respond and give us data about what it was like for them to receive a diagnosis. We did a parallel survey over to the Child Neurology Society members. So that's about 2,000 child neurologists that practice within North America. Here's just some high-level results about what they told us their journey was like. About 50% of them, it took a year to get a diagnosis. A fourth of them took 4 years to find a diagnosis. And unfortunately, 10% took almost 10 years to find a diagnosis. Within that time, almost half received at least one misdiagnosis. And I put this quotation up too. A diagnosis is just not a diagnosis. A diagnosis really influences the medication you receive, the therapy you receive, the support services you have access to. In our advocacy community, a lot of times the community support that you have access to. So this is a very profound, very impactful journey that families are on. And so we have to be able to support them and acknowledge that this is not linear, that it won't just be till tomorrow. It won't be just one test is ordered, as Mariella was telling you, and that you're going to get exactly what your diagnosis is. This is a complex journey. And it's important for us as advocacy organizations to support you through that journey. So what can you do to support yourself and your family through that journey? And the main thing that we really advocate for here at the Child Neurology Foundation is the development and the sustainment of very healthy family and provider relationships. So that ongoing communication, no matter, again, if you're at a moment of joy or you're at a moment of grief and disappointment, that you can talk to your provider, hopefully your medical home provider, about what those goals of care are. From the provider standpoint, what we learned in this survey is they themselves are often confused about what test to order, where to go, issues of access. Will insurance cover this? Will it not? They're anxious about how to discuss these results with families as well. And what if they give a result that has potentially harmful emotionally, heavy burden to the family? How will that come about? They also worry if they give a result and there is no therapy options available, what does that mean in their relationship? And I think it's important to note that a fourth of the parents, or I'm sorry, the families that took this survey told us they don't want genetic testing. And you can see really the reasons too that they're choosing not to explore genetic options. So again, while we're here and we often talk about genetic testing, whole genome sequencing, these amazing innovations that are coming to the forefront, it's important too as an advocacy community that we can really understand that it's an individual family's journey and how we build appropriate supports that match their goals of care. And the last thing that I just want to stress is in this session, as well as all of these magnificent sessions that you all have access to at Global Genes, there's a lot of information, a lot of networking, a lot of energy around it, and it's absolutely fantastic. Through it all, please just remember that you're not alone. There is always someone to call to answer the next question you have. There is always another support program, whether that's online, virtual, in your state, in your disease community, or across the globe that can help support you so you don't feel alone. We're all living in a time of incredible isolation, and now that's only compounded for those of us in the rare disease community. And so I just wholeheartedly wanted to leave you with the sentiment that you're not alone. We're here to help. And right now, I think we're really interested in listening to you and seeing what sort of further questions we can answer. Thanks so much.
Sharlene, I think you're on mute. Possibly. Lost you for a second there. Hi, everyone. This is Rachel from Global Genes. While we wait for Sharlene to connect, I have a question from the audience. We're going to go into Q&A. I know Sharlene has some prepared for the panel as well, but I'm going to start by throwing a question out to the group that was in the chat. So this one comes from Parvati, and she says, for newly found gene variants, is there a data repository that is available to the broader research community? I don't know if the panel, if one of you wants to kick it off and answer that, or if you need me to repeat it, let me know. But that'll be our first question.
Can you repeat the question? Where to deposit the information about your genetic information? Was that the question?
Yeah, so they were asking for newly found gene variants. Is there a data repository that is available to the broader research community?
Yes, there are actually multiple ones through, for example, a place called Gene Matcher. That is a place where we can upload the information of an unknown variant. There are a number of other ones too. I can actually take a look at that while we're taking another question and then answer it more in detail.
I also just want to jump in and say, I know that from the patient perspective, a lot of times the concern about putting data into those repositories is who owns it, you know, and really the patient family want to keep that. And so there is a new organization that's called RareX that is putting together a universally, and it's interoperable, meaning it can talk to different systems, and it's one that the patient and families, if they put their information in free of charge, they can also have, they're the owners of it.
Thank you for that. I also wanted to know, what are some of the biggest challenges that families experience when they're faced with a rare diagnosis, or even the Odyssey altogether?
I think from our experience here at CHOC, the most difficult part is that in the metabolic field, there is often no treatment options. And so how to deal with that, and then how to navigate a lot of advice that comes maybe from outside, that there's some alternative treatments, or that things can be tried that are not part of mainstream, and for families to navigate that, that's often very complicated, because of course they want to do the best for their child, and to hear that currently there is nothing available is very, very difficult. So we always want to caution families to not go for things that really may actually hurt their child, but to also always keep up hope, because the field is moving so rapidly. We ourselves can hardly keep up with it. And always look on clinicaltrials.gov if there's a new clinical trial, and to get always the newest information. And to check in with their physician, to check in with their center of specialty and excellency. If you have a child identified with a rare disease, it's best to find a center of excellency and then to stick with that team and keep working with that team, so that they can continuously support you in actually finding something that can help your family, and to connect with other families that have a similar disease. Here we work on mitochondrial diseases, so we're very involved with the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, which brings families, researchers, and physicians together every year in a meeting. And just to attend these meetings, I think everybody learns from each other and keeps abreast of the newest information regarding treatment. And the field with respect to gene therapy now is moving so rapidly. So I think that's important, to just always keep updated information.
Thank you for that. And if anyone else on the panel wants to chime in on how families can best navigate the journey.
I mean, this is obviously a topic I could talk at on nausea. I don't think that would help anyone. I guess what one of the insights that I gained while I was in practice, but also now here at the Child Neurology Foundation, is the journey of acceptance. And that is one that oftentimes starts maybe with grief, because the life that family had wished for, hoped for, saw, when that moment of the diagnosis, or even when the first symptoms start to appear, there is kind of that dissolution of that dream. And accepting that there is a new journey that's being unfolded for them can be very difficult, as it should be, and it's okay. We have families that have that kind of milestone, and they just jettison forward through testing, through setting up with case management, getting in with dietitians. They are just on the go. And we have some that just really sit with this new normal. And what I would encourage families to do is just be very honest and vulnerable about where they're at, and be able to talk to their medical team and their support system about where they're at. And then as they're ready, begin to take steps forward that match their goals of care. There's a wonderful, wonderful poem. It's pretty common within the children with special health care needs community, and it's called Welcome to Holland. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't read that to consider. You can just Google Welcome to Holland. It was written by a mother whose child was diagnosed with a rare condition. And it really talks about how she was preparing for a trip to Italy, and she got off the plane and she arrived in Holland, and how the disruption of expectations was painful. But once she began to explore Holland, she saw that there was beauty and blessings within that as well.
That is an interesting perspective. Thank you for that. So would anyone have any clues or cues for how patients and caregivers can navigate the dialogues between their physicians, and how physicians can better provide the diagnosis to patients and have that discussion with them?
I think if you me jumping in and answering that, that's a very tough question. I think that information transfer is very, very important between physician and patient. But I guess also we have to remember that there are people working behind the scenes who write up those reports, who do those tests and those analysis. One, keeping an open line of communication can be very, very important. And then also how that information is delivered. Sometimes the best way to give a message might not be to the patient directly. It could be in writing. It could be in a video. But also, I guess connecting if you're a physician, connecting to the patient on a social base. One, just ask them how they're doing. Is there anything interesting happening in their lives despite of what they're going through? And then from the patient perspective, I think the patients, one, continue to ask questions, also encourage their doctors and physicians, and to stay on their doctors and physicians, saying, almost in a way of saying, like, listen, I know I have this condition. I know that there's not a lot of information, but you're my doctor for a reason. I believe in you. I believe that you can give me the answers, and that with those answers, you can make one, the doctor for treating future patients, and for the patients one day maybe be a patient advocate for their condition. So hopefully that helps.
Thank you for that. Does anyone else have to add on that? I see a hand, Mariella.
I want to add to that. I'm so glad Darrell said this. Don't be shy. That's all I can say as advice for patients and families. You are your best advocate, and we see a lot of patients. The physicians are here for you. They have so many cases. They're always overworked, but they appreciate all your help and input. And we, for example, here have seen many times that patients and their families have become actually experts in their own field, in their own gene, which is always very cool for us. We actually like that. We like to work with the families. And so we have a repository of their children's skin fibroblasts here, and they might find some really interesting research that's going on in England or in Australia, and they have put us in touch with a researcher there that we didn't even know. And then we arrange for their child cells to be sent there, and that's all authorized in our IRB. Of course, the families have agreed to this and consented. They know exactly where their children's cells are. So we are very encouraging of families to be proactive. Of course, they have to be patient with us. We do our best to help everybody. But we learn from the families just as much as we learn from our colleagues in the field. And so just don't give up, do your own research, and do it continuously because the field changes rapidly.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And if I could just jump in one thing too that I've learned, I remember when I would be consulted on a patient with that was about to receive a rare diagnosis, I would ask to not go into that room without a genetic counselor. Now, I was always at a healthcare system that had access to genetic counselors, but what a difference that conversation makes. I remember when I was pregnant with my first child, my obstetrician told me, you know, delivery, Amy, is just the beginning. And I was thinking, no, dude, this is the end of 9 months of carrying this 10-pound baby. And I think about diagnosis as the same thing. It is just the beginning to the next leg of your journey. And so a genetic counselor, they're just incredible with helping that family begin to really understand the diagnosis. If a genetic counselor is not available, so you can always say to your provider, you know, when we have the conversation about the results of these tests, could we have a genetic counselor available? Now during COVID, you know, many providers are using telehealth, and a lot of times they can all Zoom in at the same time. It just takes a little bit of coordination. There's many genetic counseling services that are available through the web that the family could also help organize. Oftentimes you can reach out to organizations like Child Neurology Foundation or Global Genes. We could help the family sort of navigate that. If you really can't get a genetic counselor into that conversation, the other provider I would really advocate for, I don't know, Darrell and Mariella, if you agree with me, but to get a social worker in the room, just because it's a life-changing moment, and you just want to know kind of what other resources you could have available to help as you start figuring out your plan of care.
Yeah, that's a really well-rounded approach to making sure you have all the bases covered, short of having a scientist on hand like at Chalk Children's. But I wanted to talk to you guys now about the specific diagnostic tests that come back from these explorations. So what should families know about the emerging diagnostic tools? And what should they know about like rapid whole genome sequencing or exome sequencing? And what are the types of results that come back, their accuracy, their ability to diagnose by themselves? Could you give me any feedback on that?
Yeah, so we usually try to start with gene panels if the physicians have a very good idea what the diagnosis could be, what the culprit gene could be. They start with gene panels because they're more focused, and then they throw a wider berth going out to whole exome sequencing, which covers all of our genes, but only limited portions of the gene, all the ones that actually code for a protein. So when there is no diagnosis from that, they may have the ability to go to whole genome sequencing. It's more expensive, and not all insurers may cover those services. I think exome sequencing is now so common that it's mostly covered by insurance. We at Chalk see about a 50 to 60% rate of cases that are then resolved with a genetic diagnosis, but 30 to 50% of families, even after having these extensive genetic tests where basically the entire genome of their child was sequenced, come back as inconclusive because the data is there and the answer is there, but we haven't been able to pick it out of so the needle in the haystack is still hidden, even though the data sits on our computers. We have to pinpoint what is actually the culprit. And just from experience, it's usually around maybe 10 different possibilities, and to discern that can take quite some time. And it takes a very, very close team approach with the physicians because I don't know these diseases in terms of what symptom would point more to the one disease versus the other disease, or all of the values that can be tested in the laboratory. That's not my specialty. That's the physician, and he'll say, oh, Mariella, this gene might make more sense. And I'm a cell biologist, so I can say, oh, okay, this gene is active in this part of the cell, and in these type of cells, are those actually affected? Is there a test that you could do to see if there's something wrong with those pathways? So it takes a very close collaboration between the scientist that has all these options of what it could be and the physician. Without the physician, we're really walking around in the dark as the scientist or as the data scientist.
Interesting. Anyone else have something to add?
I have something to add. So as the data scientist, the diagnostic tests and even the drug for potential therapies, they are getting more expansive. And they're also getting better, especially with the help of artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we're able to pick in the haste in regards to research that caliber. Then also being able to find more pathways, and then also sure that diagnoses is very clear and open source as well. So machine learning.
So I'm just going to cut you because you're going in and out. It seems like you're saying that machine learning and artificial intelligence can help with needle in a haystack problems like what Mariella is describing, where you have maybe a complicated diagnosis. And it seems like you're saying open source data sharing is also helpful in a situation like this.
Exactly. And with machine learning, like Dr. Simon said, still, we're going to need the physician's input. Those are as accurate as possible because even the models can. So hopefully, in the coming months and the coming years, that connection between machine learning and cell biology research and clinical care can become stronger for the benefit of the patient.
Got it. And Amy, do you have anything to add from your perspective?
I know when they're talking above my pay grade. I am not the one to talk about technology innovation. So they've got the floor. Great job. I would just say, be like me, ask questions. If you don't understand, just say, I don't understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. And, I think when you get a diagnosis or you have a chronic disease, there are so many questions and people really shouldn't be afraid to ask them, especially when you have the doctor's time. And it seems like you guys are saying that doctors are integral to this. They're completely irreplaceable. So it seems like a close relationship between your doctor, the patient, and your entire medical team is really important for getting a diagnosis and living a healthy life afterwards. So I'd like to talk to you guys now about more about how families might experience, or caregivers and patients themselves might experience emotional toil from a rare disease diagnosis. Do you guys have any advice or tips or experiences you'd like to share about maybe guilt or shame, any of these, wondering how they're going to function in the long term, maybe with children diagnosed with childhood diseases? How will they gain independence when medications help them live longer? How will they transition into adulthood? Do you guys have any thoughts on this topic?
Again, I wish I could buy everyone lunch and just feed you so I could just talk at the mouth. There's so much to say with that question. I think it echoes a little bit back to maybe what I commented on first, that it's a very individual response, and it could be kind of all over the map, and then that is okay. For someone like myself who's a bit type A and likes to plan, a decade in advance, we have families that immediately want to ask, what's the prognosis? What's the treatment goals? How do we start talking about this openly in the community? How do we talk about it in our church? How do we talk about it in the school system? How do we set up IEPs? And then we have others that do have feelings of grief or guilt, especially with genetic and metabolic conditions that perhaps, I gave this to my child, and perhaps that's even generational. And maybe they're the first ones in their families to want to openly talk about it. And all I can say to not just take over the rest of this is whatever you're feeling is okay. And to again, start to identify at least one person within your medical home team. That could be your physician, that could be a social worker, that could be a genetic counselor, that could be a nurse, that could be a therapist. It could be a close friend, someone that you can start talking to about how this news is having you reframe life. And then once you can get a better sense of where you're at with that, then there's always steps that you can take. The other, I think, really, I always like to think like, what would you do tomorrow? Like, what's something I could tell you if you did this tomorrow, there could be some benefit. And we're a big proponent of peer support here at the Child Neurology Foundation. So peer support is really when a patient or caregiver speaks to someone else who's gone through a similar journey. There's lots of evidence out in other disease states that show the tremendous benefit and actually health outcomes when peer support is utilized. You can look at mental health and Alcoholics Anonymous, or in obstetrics, and you can look at Lamaze. It's that feeling of that you're not alone and that someone else has walked before you and they have made it. And so in the advocacy community, there's lots and lots of peer support programs that are administered virtually. And so I know Global Genes has one, the Child Neurology Foundation has one. We're more of the kind of the umbrella organizations that if you contact us, you mostly won't be talking to staff. We'll connect you with another parent who's walked a similar journey. And then once you find your diagnosis, oftentimes then we hand you off to a program that might be within your single disease state. Just so that, you can start getting more familiar with that community. And I think that peer support is a great intervention to helping you walk this new normal. No one better to lead you than someone who's walked in similar footsteps.
Yeah, it's almost like a system of mentorship in some way. And Mariella, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, now our centrifuge is going, so I don't know how much you can hear of me, but for us it's very, very important that the diagnosis actually takes away the possibility of parents thinking that they had anything to do with the condition that they found their child in. So we see this a lot in clinic, that there are some misconceptions that the parents think that they are at fault for what happened to their child. If I hadn't gone into the hot tub so many times when I was pregnant, or if I hadn't eaten sushi so many times when I was pregnant, or if I had drank less alcohol, so the sky is the limit. People always try to find fault in themselves, and it's one thing that I always feel very good about when there is a genetic diagnosis. You actually have an explanation for the family. You can tell them that none of the things that they thought that they did wrong had any kind of play in this diagnosis, and that it was something that happened by chance, and it was absolutely not their fault, and there was nothing they could do about it.
Yeah, and that reassurance, I'm sure, goes a long way, and maybe alongside a small, maybe brief genetic discussion to help them understand how segregation works and genes. But So do you find that your patients are knowledgeable after they meet with you? Do they really truly understand the way their disease has occurred in them and how it can be passed along in next generations? And do you hear your patients making decisions on fertility at that moment?
So we follow patients often for decades. And yes, so from infant to adulthood. So I've been involved with CHOC for the first 10 years, and I've been here now almost for 10 years. So I have actually seen children from 2-3 years old to now being adults. So it's a journey. And there is, as a genetic counselor, when I started out, I thought, okay, now I went through the inheritance patterns and then I had my nice chart and I explained everything very well. Oh yeah, and the family now knows now for sure how this gene is inherited, and but that's usually not the case. And I think the biggest reason is that they're overwhelmed with their diagnosis. They think about, how am I going to tell this to the rest of my family while you're explaining inheritance? Or they're thinking about what does this mean for the future, for treatment? And so it's important to understand that even though you may have done a very good job explaining inheritance patterns, it most of the time did not stick, or it made sense at the time, but then families go home and they're like, oh, what did she say? Don't be shy to ask again. That's what we would expect. We don't expect you to consolidate all of that information the first time. It's completely okay to ask it over and over and over. And sometimes 2-3 years later, we again explain the inheritance. It also depends on how involved the families were. In the beginning, maybe they weren't so interested in all of that, but now they become interested because they've become part of an advocacy group. Or so it's a process, it's a journey, and never be shy to ask the same question again. That's what we're here for. That's our job. And if the families already knew everything, we'd have no purpose.
Sharlene, I think you're on mute. So.
Did she drop off maybe?
She was on mute. So I think that's almost time. So I guess we will have to wrap up today's panel, From Data to Decisions. I'd like to thank Amy, and I'd also like to thank Dr. Simon for attending as well. Oh, Sharlene is back, and she'll finish us out.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Darrell. Thank you, Dr. Simon. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Darrell, for leading a great discussion. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And thank you for any questions that you asked. Please follow us on the hashtag that we provided earlier, and also at Global Genes. And please join us for either Elevate Natural History Study Planning and Reach, or Communication Tools for Assessing Science coming up next. Thank you all. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Have a great week. Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.